When I was actually doing BTech, the most often question that was asked in the Viva as well as in examinations was what's the difference between call by value and hello all. In this video, we are going to learn about functions and advantages of functions. And also we are going to look at the difference between system defined functions and user defined functions. And after that, we are going to write a simple C program to implement the concept that we have learned so far. And finally, we are going to learn about the difference between call by value and call by reference. When I was actually doing BTech, the most often question that was asked in the Viva as well as in examinations was what's the difference between call by value and call by reference. I remember still getting stumbled or not able to clearly figure it out, the difference between both of them. So we're going to dive deeper into that concept too, and also we're going to solve a C program on that as well. Okay, what are functions? Okay, the definition goes like this. Normally a function is a group of statements that together perform a task. If you have already written a couple of programs on C language, you might have already known a function called main. The program execution itself starts from the main function itself, right? That itself is a function. Okay, functions can also be referred as subprograms, methods, procedures. So if someone calls it as procedure, of course, that's a function as well. If someone calls it as method, that's also a function. Okay, the main advantage of these functions is like improves the understandability of a program. For suppose you have 10 to 20 developers who are writing the program, okay, you can actually subdivide the problem into smaller problems and give one function to a developer and ask him to, hey, can you actually write a function to do or perform such and such task. Okay, and also once that program or once that procedure or function is completely done, you can reuse that function numerous times. We have already solved a couple of questions. If you look at power function, which is there in math.jd library, somebody has written that and now we are simply using it a number of times. So that's why the third advantage is can be called any number of times. And basically we have two types of functions here. You can see in the slide, system defined functions and user defined functions. Okay, system defined functions we have already seen, like main function as well as printf, scanf, and some more functions you have seen. If you have probably worked with math.jd library, there you have seen power function. Likewise, exit is also a function. Okay, exit standard library.h header file. And user defined functions are normally the functions that we as users write those, and those are basically divided into four types. Okay, no arguments and no return value, and arguments and no return value, arguments and return value, no arguments and return value. Okay, maybe at this point in time you may not understand this, but slowly we'll dive into these four things and we'll try to understand what exactly are these. Okay, now we're going to look at the syntax. Okay, and syntax is like, first we have the return type followed by the function name, and in the parenthesis we have the arguments. Whatever arguments we wanted to pass to the function, we can pass it here in this parenthesis, followed by open flower brace and closing flower brace, and whatever logic you wanted to write, you can actually write it here. Okay, basically by the time you actually started learning functions, you might have already solved problems related to decision making, if, else, loops. So you have already noticed that we are using the main function. Okay, main function name is main. Okay, and the return type is integer, and you have the parenthesis, but here argument declarations actually go here, but here in this main function we don't have any arguments, we are not passing any arguments, but technically you can pass arguments. Okay, and you have this open brace, closing brace, and all the logic that we wanted to write we actually have written here, and the compiler picked it and executed that piece of code. So now basically we have seen that there are four types of user defined functions, right? They go like this: no arguments and no return value, arguments and no return value, and basically four combinations. Okay, no arguments and return value, or arguments, return values, four combinations are. Okay, so basically if you look at here, there are no arguments, so we are not supposed to give any arguments here. Yes, in my parentheses there are no arguments, I'm not passing any arguments. And no return value, yes, as I don't have any return value, I actually kept it as void. Okay, coming here, arguments and no return values. No return value, so obviously I kept void. And arguments, yes, I am passing arguments here. Okay, I'm passing two arguments, two integer type values into this function, or to this function as arguments. And here arguments and return values, so I have both. Okay, return type, I have integer, I'm returning, technically I'm returning an integer from the function itself, and also I am actually passing two integer values to the function. And finally, no arguments and return value. So I don't have any arguments here, if you carefully see here, but I have a return type integer. I'm returning 25 from the function. Okay, let's try to write a C program and understand the concept that we have learned so far. Okay, the best way to learn any programming language is actually to start coding. Okay, it's more like swimming. Okay, even though we see swimming every day, or somebody swimming, we feel like, okay, I too can swim, and it looks so easy and simple. But the only way to learn swimming is we actually diving and jumping into the swimming pool and start swimming. Okay, likewise coding also, the more you look at the coding tutorial videos, you feel like, okay, I got it, I understood the concept. But only when you put your hands on the keyboard and start coding, you'll realize that, okay, these are the problems that I am facing, or these are the errors that I am facing. Okay, the best way to learn any coding or programming language is to actually start coding. Okay, let's go ahead and start coding in C, and let's try to understand the concepts that we have learned so far. Okay, basically I picked the program, addition of two numbers using functions, and we are going to use the 4 user-defined functions that I actually discussed. Okay, I'm gonna start writing the program. So if you are new to this C program and you don't know how to kickstart a C program and the basic functions like printf and scanf and the importance of main function, I already made a separate video on that. I'm going to leave that video link in the description, so you can go and check it out before actually start learning these concepts and coding in C. Okay, so first thing, as this is related to addition of two numbers, I'm going to ask the user to enter two numbers. Okay, enter two numbers, and I'm gonna read the same into two variables, like I'll call them as %a and read into %a and %b, int a and int b. Okay, so basically we all know that, right? Int sum is equal to a plus b. That's it. I can simply printf sum of %d and %d equal to %d. First %d a, next %d b, third %d sum. Okay, so the output will be neat, and the user will be able to understand the sum of whatever we entered, 5 and 5, let's say. So 5 and 5 equal to, so instead of and, as it is sum, I can simply give as plus, so that the output would be clean. And after this, I'll give a printf, so that the output look clean and no issues. And this is not using any functions, just addition of two numbers. Let's check it out, and then we'll try to understand how to actually modify this and start writing using user-defined functions. Okay, I opened my terminal and I'm gonna compile it. Okay, oh, lots of errors, because not exactly errors, but warnings. It's telling that, hey, I don't know what is printf scanf because we forgot to include header file. Okay, and I can compile it. This time no errors. I'm gonna run it. a.out. Enter two numbers. I'm gonna give 5, 4. Yes, beautiful. Sum of 5 plus 4 is 9. It's working fine. So now let's see how we can write this addition of two numbers using no arguments and no return value. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm gonna write a function, no arguments, right, and no return value, and my function name. So we already learned that the syntax is return type followed by function name parenthesis. This is what we've learned, right? So here no return type, so I'll directly put it as void, and function name, I'm gonna name my function as sum. Okay, so meaningful names, try to give the meaningful name, so that if any other person outside Excel comes and sees your program also, he or she must be able to clearly understand the function by looking at the function name itself. Okay, sum, and no return value and no arguments. I'm not going to pass any arguments. So as I'm not going to pass any arguments and I'm not going to return anything from this, function. So obviously all this logic, whether it is reading or writing, all these things should actually go and sit here, because there is no way I can actually send this a and b values from main function, okay, because this function can't receive any arguments. At the same time, there is no way that I can return from this function. I can calculate the what do you call the result, and I can't return it from this function. So the only way is writing the entire logic there and calling that function here, okay. So main function is calling this sum function. And what happens, as I said in my earlier programs, always the program execution starts from the main function. The compiler looks at this main function and starts executing from line number 28 or whatever is there inside this function. So it encounters the very first one, 28 line number sum, and directly the control goes here, and whatever your logic here, it will start executing line by line. It will actually declare it, create two variables a and b in the memory, and prints this on the console and waits for the user to actually enter the values and start storing these values into the address of a and b in the main memory. And then it's going to create another variable sum and store the sum of these two values, and then that will be printed on the screen. And for beautification, or for having this output clean, we actually kept this new line, okay. This is what happens. So the first one, no arguments, no return value. So no arguments, no return value, and in the main function all we did was we are calling this function. Let's see whether it's gonna work or not, okay. I compiled it and there is an error. It's telling you missed the semicolon. So even though we do some mistakes, it will actually point us out and help us to solve them. Two numbers, technically there won't be any difference. The output will be same. You know what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put it as sum1 like this, okay. So sum1, so that we'll be understanding, because we need to write another three functions, right? Now next function is what? Arguments and no return value. I'm gonna simply copy it. What I'm gonna do is I'm close like this, or we'll write like this. Void, I'll call it as sum2, means nothing but no arguments or no return values. I'll paste it here so that user or the outsider can easily understand what this function is able to do. And we are supposed to calculate sum using the same thing. This time what we are supposed to do is we are supposed to pass arguments, and there is no return value. So no return value void, and carefully we need to close it, and we need to pass the arguments. So this time, as I can pass the arguments, okay, what I'll do is I'll declare two variables, and then I'll ask the user to enter two numbers, and then scanf %d, ampersand a, ampersand b, okay. And instead of directly computing the sum here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass these values that I have read to this function, because this function can actually read values, right? So I've declared like two variables x and y. As I'm passing integer type values, I actually declared them as integer. So technically what's happening here is the values that are there, okay, in a and b, basically we'll call this function here so that we'll understand it better. I'll give it as a comma b. So whatever value that I've given in a will be copied to the variable x, and whatever value I've given in b will be copied to the value y, okay. So simply here what I'm going to do is int sum is equal to x plus y. You can't give a b here, okay, because if you have understood the scoping of variables, you will be understanding this a and b can't be accessed in this function. If you want to access these should be global variables. You have to declare somewhere here in under stdio.h. so here you can access x and y. So x and y, I actually added them, and the result is stored in sum. And again, I cannot actually return the sum from here because this is void. So the only option that I have is to print the sum here itself, okay. So I am going to print my sum here in this function only. Sum of %d plus %d is equal to %d, but here x comma y, and it's there in sum. It looks good. Now we're going to execute it and see. Okay, someone already I commented, so this function will not be executed, only sum2 will be executed because I'm calling it here. So I'm going to compile. It's perfect. Again, so it's asking for two numbers, 8 and 7. It's 15 because we did not give printf here or new line. That's why the output is not that clean. I always wanted the output to be clean. Okay, now our output will be clean. So basically we did nothing. This, I mean, logically if you see, it's addition of two numbers only, but the way we have written is entirely different. Okay, because particularly if you look at the competitive coding, if you look at HackerRank or HackerEarth, those kinds of platforms, right, they'll already write certain amount of code. They'll write like a function and then leave some blanks in the function, so that you are supposed to fill up those blanks. For that, you need to understand how this 4 user-defined functions work. So whether this function will not allow me to return the result from here, and this function also will not allow, but this function will take these two values and pass values. So all those things you need to practice for you to get better at writing functions. Now, okay, this is also done. Now what we are going to do is no arguments and return value. We will try to do no arguments and return value. So no arguments, and I'll name it as sum3. So it will not have any arguments, but it has return value. So I'll because obviously sum of two numbers and we are storing it in sum, obviously that is also an integer, so return type will be integer. In some cases, if you are returning a character, if you are returning an array which is of type integer, depending on that you can actually give your return type here. Now if you understand, you can't pass the values here. As you can't pass the arguments here, this logic, obviously I should keep it here, right? Yes. So again, all this piece of code, I'm gonna comment it. This is not there, let's say, or in order to avoid confusion, we'll delete it. If we want, we can actually have it again. So sum3, I'm gonna call. Okay, no arguments. Yes, I'm not passing any arguments, so that's why I'm reading the values here itself. And return value, so it can actually return the value. So what I can do is int sum is equal to a plus b, and then finally I can return sum. Particularly in my basics video, I talked about how this return function works. Okay, so there you can see, if you really wanted more clarification about return function will return the value that is stored in sum to this function, to the main function. Okay, because this is the function from where we are actually calling this function. So whenever I am returning a value from here, I need to actually catch that value. So int, I'll give it as sum. You shouldn't get confused, because this int sum, the scope is only within main function, and this int sum, this scope is only within this function. Same thing with this and this. So do not get confused. Spend some more time and try to understand this and solve more C programs on this to get a hold on this. Okay, finally, whatever value that I've got here, sum, I can directly print it here. Okay, printf sum of, but again, if you see %d and %d, if I give, I basically will not have those %d and %d values, because those values are already here. Okay, so I can't actually, I am only sum I am writing from here, so only I can have sum here and print sum. That's it. Let's try executing our sum3. Yes, 9 7 16, it's working fantastically fine. 617. So again, I wanted to repeat myself here, because here we are trying to understand these user defined functions. Okay, how we can write the business logic. Whenever a business problem is given to you, we need to understand, okay, which kind of function I need to pick up, like arguments and no return value and no return value, and with arguments, it's up to you. Okay, you as a programmer has to make a decision which suits or which type of user defined function suits and write accordingly. So sum3 is also done. What we are going to do is, and finally we are going to do this. Okay, I'm gonna paste it here. This time arguments and return type, I have everything. So return type, so int I'll give, and this time I'll name it as sum4, and it can take the argument, so I can give int x and int y, and then int x int y is there, so simply I can give int return x plus y. Okay, previously what we did was we calculated and stored in an intermediate variable sum and returning the sum directly. I can do return x plus y. Okay, so return x plus y will directly give my value. So for that, I'm gonna delete this. As I can pass the values, I'm gonna read those values from here. Again, I can read the values from here because I have to pass, or I can pass, right, in this case. So that's why I'm reading here. If you're not allowed to pass values here, then obviously you have to read the values here. Okay, don't get confused. So depending on the situation, we are actually tweaking the program and trying to understand these 4 user defined functions. So again, I'll ask the user to enter 2 numbers, scanf, %id, %d, &a, ampersand b. Okay, and then I'm gonna call sum4, and as I said in the earlier program, that particular sum3, as it is returning the sum, we need to catch it. Okay, I can put it as like int sum equal to sum4, and finally print here like sum equal to %id, and I can give sum. Okay, and let's try to compile and execute it. Okay, it is telling int sum4 declared here. It's basically telling, hey, you forgot to pass the values. Okay, that's why. Okay, we need to compile it first. Compile, run. The output would be like 8513. It's perfectly fine. So instead of again storing it under variable, what I can do is I can simply directly write that function here, sum4. So it will also work fine. See, no errors, nothing. 8 7 15, and I can run 5 plus 4 9. It's working perfectly fine. So basically these are the 4 user defined functions that you have in C language, and depending on the business logic, you will choose which one fits you best or fits best for your program and pick that one and code accordingly. So one more thing I wanted to cover here is scope. Okay, particularly if you carefully understand all this function, when I call sum4, this sum4 is accessible because this is above main function. If I keep this below this, okay, still in my this sum of two numbers.c program, my sum4 is there, but it is not accessible by main because that's the scope problem. Okay, let's try to compile and see. Compilation, you can see that warning, implicit declaration of sum4, did you mean sum3? Because it is able to access sum3 but not sum4. But basically, as it is a warning, you can see here this is a warning. Okay, cancel, this is a warning. We can actually still, the output file, binary file will be generated and we can still execute it. Okay, if I execute it, 87 or 8970, it's working fine. But whenever you are giving the function like this, not above the main function, it's always the best practice in order to avoid that that warning. It's always best to declare it above this main function. You can still give int x comma int y. Okay, you can declare like this, and let's check it out whether that warning will be disappeared or not. See, now the warning is disappeared. So what you can do is all these 4 functions you can basically declare above here, like int, and then first is int sum, right? Int sum is just void. You can declare like this. the beginning of the problem itself, and then sum2 as both int x and int y. Perfect. Sum3 and sum2 is void, right? We have to give void int and no values. This is sum3. Okay, sum4 is perfect. So if you give like this, then what happens is all these three functions that you have written above the main function can also go down. I mean, you can actually write. So main function will now be able to understand even though it is not above it. Okay, you can have like this. So particularly it's better to know the scope as well, particularly when you are writing the functions. Now let's try to compile it. No, there's nothing still because our program is still calling sum4, right? So where is our main function? Here is our main function. So it's calling sum4. Now sum4 is already we declared above. So here we are declaring what all the functions, user defined functions that we're going to use in our program, so that main will be able to access. Otherwise a warning will be coming. Of course you can ignore the warning and still the program would work, but still if you wanted to have a clean program output without any warnings errors, it's better to always declare when you are writing the user defined functions below the main function. So for practice, what you can do is you can actually practice with subtraction, okay, subtraction of two numbers using functions, or multiplication, division, or you can pick up factorial of a given number. You can and you can play around with these user defined functions. Pick a problem and try to solve using this user defined functions to get more grip on it. Now we are going to learn about the difference between call by value and call by reference. This is a simple C program to swap two given numbers. If you have given 5 and 10, the output would be 10 and 5. In this case we are giving 10 and 20, so the output would be 20 and 10. The logic is happening here, and looking at this code you can understand this is a function with no return type and arguments are being passed here. So here we assigned value 10 and 20 to variable a and b, and we are calling the swap function, and here in the swap function we are printing the values, as well as in the main function we are printing the value. So what exactly is happening here is, as discussed previously, the values that are there in a and b will be copied to x and y. Let's understand this with an example. So let's say you have this in your main memory. Okay, coming to operating system context, the moment you run the program will become a process. Okay, your process will have access to the main memory. So in the main memory, let's say there are two variables a and b like this. Okay, these are of type integer, and these have the values 5 and 4, but technically 10 and 20 here. But here I gave it as 5 and 4. Values are there in a and b respectively. So whenever you call this swap function, what happens? The a and b values are copied to x and y. So in the main memory, a and b are two variables that are created, and also x and y are two variables that are created, and the values are simply copied from a and b. So this is call by value. So if you manipulate the values of x and y, it will not affect the values of a and b, because a and b have 5 and 4 in it. And if you x and y, in this case they are swapped, so 4 will come here and 5 will go here, but this will not manipulate the values of a and b. Clearly you can understand the values are being copied to x and y respectively. But if you look at call by reference, in call by reference, instead of copying the values of a and b into x and y, what we are going to do is we are copying the addresses of a and b in the main memory. Every variable have its own memory address. Okay, in this case some memory address is there for a and b, and x and y also has their own memory address. So in order to actually send address, if you carefully observe here, we are actually sending the addresses of a and b, not the values of a and b. And also to dereference this, okay, in order to access this, we are supposed to put this as pointer x and pointer y. It will point to the variable that is stored at that memory address. Okay, you will understand about this in depth, particularly when you look at the pointers concept. Okay, so here if you make any changes, technically you are making the changes to these addresses or the values that are stored at this addresses. So in this case, if you manipulate the values of x and y, then obviously you are manipulating the values stored at this address, that is the values of a and b will also be manipulated. So you need to understand, in call by value only the values are passed. So even though if you tinker with x and y values, nothing will happen, but in call by reference you're sending the address here. So if you tinker with x and y, then definitely the values of a and b will also be changed. We'll quickly dive in and write the C program for the same and check this. So I created another C file in sum of two numbers only, value versus reference. What I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly write into main function and give int 10 and int b equal to 20. Okay, and then I'm going to call function a comma b. So directly I'm going to void swap int x comma int y, here int temp, and I'm supposed to write the swapping logic, and then temp equal to x and x equal to y and y equal to temp, and here values of x and y in swap function, percentile d and percentile d, and I'm going to give a new line, and here x comma y, and same thing here values of a and b in main function. Obviously we are not doing anything here, so values will not be changed here. Okay, a and b, and in order to understand better, we are going to put another printf here, values of a and b in main function before calling swap function. So in main function, in main, after calling swap function, and I'll close this. We'll compile and execute the same. GCC value, oh, every time I do this mistake, forgot to include stdio.h, include stdio.h, and then you're gonna run it, compile it. See, values of a and b in main function are 10 and 20, and x and y, in x and y it is 20 and 10. Obviously here you can change, but the original values of a and b are not changed here. So what I'm going to do is, now you understood, right? This is call by value. We are simply passed the values here. Even though we tinkered with x and y, a and b values are not changed. But in case of sending ampersand a and ampersand b, so in order to receive it, I have to have pointer x, pointer y, integer pointers, pointer x, give pointer x and pointer y. Okay, now as we are tinkering with x and y values, a and b values will also be changed, because we are actually manipulating the values stored in that address. Okay, we need to understand it very carefully. Okay, no errors, nothing, and that's it. You can see values of a and b before calling the swap function are 10 and 20 only, but values of x and y we tinkered in the swap function, so 20 and 10, and as we tinkered again, values of a and b are changed here. This is the difference, okay, between call by value and call by reference. Thank you all for watching this video. If you like the video, then like the video, subscribe to the channel for more similar tech content.